Hi, everybody. I'm going to run through chapter 10, work stress, worker and well-being. So when we're talking about stressors versus strain, so a stressor really is the physical and the psychological demands that each individual worker actually, how well we respond to it in the sense that, do they accumulate and do they cause us to perhaps maybe miss work or something? Or perhaps our jobs don't get done as, well as we would like them to get done because of all the stressors. But when we're talking about a strain, we're talking about it's really a strain consists of at least two stressors, either pulling or pushing an individual in different directions. So a single direction stress is usually less devastating to an individual's psychological well-being than a strain. But really, we're talking about, if we have more, so say we have a deadline for something, which is fine. And we're able to kind of work through that strain. It does put stress on our work and perhaps our work productivity, but that doesn't necessarily mean we aren't able to complete the task. But if we have two stressors, so we have a deadline that needs to be done, and then we have products that aren't able to, maybe they're back ordered or information isn't actually all there that we need. So there's another stressor on top of that. There's another strain in a sense. So we have two or more stressors that will definitely make a difference in our physical ability to do a job and the stress that we under, the anxiety or the nervousness that we get under a psychological demand. So the two of them together will create, if it's done, if we have this continually within our job, it definitely will be a problem. So when we're looking at a theoretical framework for studying of stress, we're looking at Kant and Boyster back in 1992. So what they're saying, there's these common stressors at work. So if we're talking about, if we're looking at perhaps, our organizational life. So, we have a physical and a task stressor. So again, multiple stressors can be accumulative. And it's the noise of the job, the demands of the job. Perhaps we have this idea that we don't feel like we have actual control. We can't predict the amount of control we're going to have over a particular response or typical situation. So, perceptions of control, which are important if we are going to do a job and we feel like we have all the tools that we need to do the job, we feel like we have the ability to do the job. It's my individual perception of how well I can perhaps predict my response to a situation. So I am having to, have some type of a product and I'm not getting all this information, but I know where to get the information. It may take a little bit more time. It's really about how I feel I can handle that. So when we're talking about interpersonal conflict, really we're looking at negative interactions with coworkers, with our supervisors, with clients. So this can occur when resources are scarce. Employees have, don't have similar interests in the particular job, or we feel like we are not being treated fairly, perhaps by the supervisor. So then we look at this incentive to work. So okay, we know what a rude, condescending or aggressive behavior in the workplace. If we're not respected within the workplace, it really indicates that work is healthy when we have behavioral consequences for some actions. So if I feel like I have another coworker who really isn't working well with me on a task that needs to get done, then we have to see, well, am I going to be able to actually get my job done if I'm having to go in constantly into work and I have this other coworker who's really making life difficult? And then we have customer service employees. Again, it's really how well we can react to customers. Um, if a customer comes in and they're angry, how well do we actually respond to it? But if we're barraged on a daily basis, continually over and over again, that strain will come into play. So, we have to look at how well, in a sense, our role is, you know, how well we deal with a role stress. So, if we're expected to, take on multiple tasks, um, we have to look at, do we have a clear understanding of, not only what the job entitles, but what I have to do, what is my expected behavior. There may be role conflict, there's demands from different resources or different sources, but they don't work, they don't go together, they're incompatible. And then we have to look at this idea about role overload. So, you know some positions that we carry at work, we're expected to fulfill many, many different roles. And how well does that, how well can we move from one role to a different role? Another area that we need to talk about is when we talk about work and family conflict. So, when workers experience conflict between roles, how well I'm at work and how well I'm fulfilling my personal lives, if the stressors become too much or something's happening at home and I'm bringing that and it's coming to work, do I feel like my workplace is being flexible with my time schedule? Perhaps, childcare has become a problem. The facility that I have a child at is getting, going to daycare, and the daycare is has fallen through, or they don't have adequate care. Does it make it possible where I'm working? Do they recognize that that's a problem, that's a stressor, and that perhaps I'm not able to actually do my job as well? So we're looking at this idea of how well I perceive my job and how well I understand my job. And do I actually able to process the amount of work that I have to do? And then all of a sudden we bring in, life at home and how that impacts it also. And so if within an organizational life, if there's lots of physical stressors, and if I have some, maybe the role that I am in this particular job, I have a lot of conflict with, the demands are just too high for me. Then what starts to happen, if I don't feel like I have support, if I don't recognize that within my job place that I am actually going to maybe take some time off so that I can actually get better care for my child, what happens if I don't feel that support? There's going to be strains. There's going to be more physiological strains. There's going to be more psychological strains, and there's going to be more behavior. So I may have some kind of, perhaps let's say we have some kind of a gastrointestinal issue. And what happens if I'm not feeling supportive, then I start feeling anxiety. And I don't necessarily feel like this job is supporting me. And there'll probably be a lot of a really high rate of turnover and absenteeism. So another part of this that they look at is, it depends on the type of personality. So we have A type and B type. So, where does my self-esteem come? Do I feel like I have a locus of control? How hardy is this? How am I able to, if I'm, say, a type B who doesn't work well in a really organized setting, then the strain becomes that I don't have the flexibility as I would like. If I'm the type that really likes to have things organized and I can work in a high stress environment, but I still have to recognize that, do I have the support? Do I understand it? So we look at this emotional labor, and it's really the regulation of one's emotions to meet the job or the organizational demands. So we have, a surface acting, meaning consisting of managing or faking one's expression or emotion. So if I'm at work and I'm constantly falling apart, where does the support come from? And are we looking at all the different intricate type, stressors and the strains that are coming into play? And how can we actually turn this around? Because in a sense, we're wanting organizations to recognize that stress and strain of a job really will impact how well our employees work. And we want to recognize that, we put a lot of time and energy, but do we necessarily want to have a high turnover? Generally not. generally not. So when we're talking about behavioral consequences, like the consequences of stress, well, we're looking at, is there chronic stress? Because we know that chronic stress has a negative effect on our memory. We don't necessarily, when we're under stress, our brains aren't working, cognitive skills aren't really high. And, we may not have a really strong reaction time, and the accuracy and how well we're working on a task will diminish with our performance. So when we're talking about performance, we're really looking about the ability to perform under these high stressors. But are we recognizing that too much stress is actually causing a problem? So when we're talking about a physiological stress, we're looking at, are there signs that are being noticed by the employer? Are we recognizing that stressful situations cause an overaction of the sympathetic nervous system, and it produces lots of stress hormones, which initially these changes can improve our decision making and our physical performance. So if there is a chronic activation of the sympathetic nervous system, there's a wear and tear on the body, and we see coronary issues and heart issues. So when we're talking about, again, are we having issues with sleep? Are we so stressed out about our job that we can't actually, do a good job? And then we start to miss work, or perhaps we go into another, we start doing behaviors that aren't necessarily what we would normally do. So we're looking at, if we can recognize that the ability for the employees to recognize with stress, do the organizations recognize how stressful a job can be, and do we have the right people in the right jobs doing the right job, or those that are overseeing, are they recognizing, when an employee is really stressed out? So when we talk about, a framework of stress management intervention, we're really looking about reducing and managing stress within an organization. So occupational health psychology this is what they do. It's really about applying, the application of psychology to improve the quality of work life, and to protecting and promote healthy, safety issues, and really the well-being of our workers. So there is a comprehensive source for the occupational health, and it's about learning how to balance work and family, learning how to balance, doing stress management. Perhaps there's an intervention that needs to come into play. So the primary preventive strategies are, they're concerned with modifying or eliminating stressors within the workplace. So, within the work environment. So most proactive and preventative approaches to stress management would be work and job design. Perhaps there's a cognitive restructuring that needs to be done. So that's primary. When we're looking at secondary, we're talking about involving, or modifying responses to the demands of a stressor. Perhaps a role is about damage control. It's about looking for strategies that require no necessarily special training, but we're looking at perhaps lifestyle choices. So such as maybe there's physical fitness, healthy eating, and weight control. So we see a lot of organizations that will give a discount to a local gym because they're trying to increase. We know that at a secondary intervention is really about helping that primary prevention. So, and when we're looking at a third prevention strategy, we're focused on healing negative effects of certain stressors. So employee assistance programs, it's about counseling provided by the organization in order for employees to deal with workplace stress. If we're recognizing there's alcohol and drug difficulties, that are maybe problems are stemming from the outside, maybe they're stemming from our home, it's really about recognizing that this is another place that we need to look at, that we need to help our employees. And it's not about an employee being terrified to come in and say, I believe that I have an issue with alcoholism. And we want our organization to say, okay, so where are you at? So we're going to target the individual and we're going to come up with some way to help reduce that stressor. And it could be, again, if we can find perhaps there's nutrition or there's the physical fitness thing we're looking at. But really what we're looking for is how can we help that employee? How can we help them so that they can actually cope? So we don't have these it's gone past the prevention. We're looking at an intervention. How does an employee or an employer, pardon me, actually support their employees? So it's really, in summary, it's the combination of various stress management interventions. Is more effective than using a single approach. All three of these have to be in play. We want to have a prevention. We want to know in advance, in case something happens, this is what we're going to do. And this is how we're going to respond to this. And this is what we're going to do if a really a third intervention needs to be in place. How are we going to create a treatment that will minimize the damage? It's about successful stress management interventions. They must accurately identify stressors causing the strain and actively determining ways to reduce those stressors. And so it's really about an organization. You don't want to wait till you're at the third level. At the third, we want to make sure that we are up, recognizing that this type of job will inevitably cause stress. And what can we do for our employees so that we don't even get to having to do an intervention? That is something that's in our minds, something that we see that's occurring. So when we look at we're looking at a frustration and aggression hypothesis. It's about constructive and destructive employees. It's really about looking at how we can best look at behaviors that are resulting from frustration for employees. And so we look at these constraints. What is getting in the way? So, we have a job that's coming up and we recognize that there's going to be a lot of stress placed on our employees. So we're going to say, okay, so here is a destructive behavior that might come from this. So how do we actually make sure we don't necessarily have to have high control at this point, but we have to make sure that we incorporate this into the organization. It's really about employees need avenues for communication concerning about the fairness of an organizational decision that will affect them. Managers need, we have to be sensitive to the signs of potential trouble that will impact individuals' work or behavior. So if we know that frustration leads to stress reaction and individual expenditures, how do we expect our employees to release that stress? And how do we, in a sense, associate behaviors that are keeping our employees from actually making sure that we don't have to dip into these interventions, that we're aware of this on top of it? Because as you know, and I'm sure all of us know, we've all experienced some kind of stressors within the job. And if we don't have anybody to reach out to, if you don't have perhaps a game plan of what we can do, then we're going to, accumulate more stress and more strains. That's all I have for chapter 10.